Today's Amud Maseches Berachos is Nun Aleph Amud Beis 51b. We're going to begin at the story of Ula Ikla Leber of Nachman, 5 lines from the top of Nun Aleph Amud Beis, and we're going to have 3 sections in today's learning. The first section, which will also lead us to the end of the 7th parak, is discussing a continuum of the halachas of shel beracha, and then we'll see a couple of halachas associated at the end. We begin the 8th parak. We're going to have a second section, which is a Mishnah that has 8 machloksim between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in regards to the halachas of a seuda and other halachas associated also. And in the third section, which will be the Gemara, we begin in the 8th parak, which will discuss the first machlokes and explaining the debate of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So, Be'ezus Hashem, let's get started. Again, 5 lines from the top of 5 lines from the top of Nun Aleph Amud Beis 51b. Ula Ikla Leber of Nachman. So we were talking about the halachas of shel beracha, and on that note, the Gemara brings a story. The Gemara tells as follows: Ula Ikla Leber of Nachman. Ula went to the house of Rav Nachman. Karech rifta bahade birkas mezayna. Karech rifta. So they ate bread together. Borich birkas mezayna, and then they did birkas hamazon. Now it sounds like Rav Nachman did the birkas hamazon, and Yoav le kaisa de birkas of Nachman. Ula offered the cup that was used for birkas hamazon. So this is shel beracha, to Rav Nachman, his host. But he didn't offer it to Yalta, who was the wife of Rav Nachman. And we're going to see this lady Yalta, she was a sharp woman, and she had her shita here. We'll see in a moment. So Rav Nachman said to Ula, Lish der mar kaisa de birkasa li Yalta. Also you should send the shel beracha to my wife Yalta, which is the Yesh Omrim we learned yesterday, which was the 11th halacha of shel beracha, is send it to the wife as well. So Amar Ula said, I disagree with that Yesh Omer, because Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Ein pri bitna shel isha misbarich, elami pri bitna shel ish, that the fruit inside of a woman, which means the ability for a woman to reproduce and receive beracha, is blessed based on the fruit of the womb of her husband. Meaning is that if her husband drinks the shel beracha, she receives the beracha, and she does not necessarily have to drink from that cup. So I'm not going to send it to your wife Yalta. How do we know this? Shen Emar, as the pasuk tells us, Uverach pri vitnecha. The pasuk says, Hashem says He will bless the fruit of bitnecha, your stomach or your womb, your insides, and bitnecha is a lashon zachar. Privit nalei ne'emar. It doesn't say the fruit of her insides, ela privit necha. Rather, it says the fruit of your insides, the male. So seemingly, says Ula, you see from here that the woman does not have to drink the shel beracha. Her husband drinks it, and she gets the benefit. She does not have to drink from this. And the Gemara says actually, there's a brayso that supports this too. Tani Nami Hachi, the Brisa supports this. It says, Rabbi Nasa Noimer, Menayin she'en pri bitna shel isha misbarech, elami pri bitna shel ish. How do we know that the fruit of the insides, means the ability for a woman to reproduce properly with bracha, is blessed when her husband receives that bracha? Shene'emar, like it says, Uverach pri vitnecha, pri vitna lo ne'emar. It doesn't say her insides, ela pri vitnecha, yours, lashon zachar. So you see, Ula said, and there's a Brisa that backed him up, that it's not necessary for Yalta to drink it. Her husband Rav Nachman is sufficient. Now we're going to see Yalta didn't appreciate this. And we had a Yesh Omer yesterday that says you're supposed to send it to Anshe Beisa, referring to the wife. So Adahachi Shama Yalta, as this was going on, Yalta heard. Kama Beziyara, she got up in her anger. Ve'alsa lebechamra, she went up to the place of wine, the cellar where they stored the wine. V'tavra arba meya dani dechamra, and she smashed 400 barrels of wine. Meaning, in order to show her frustration, she did an action. She broke 400 barrels of wine of her husband, of Rav Nachman. So Amalei Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman turned to Ula and he said, "Okay, I understand your shita, Ula, but do me a favor. Let's figure out how to resolve the situation. Nishter lamar kaisa harina. At least send her another cup of wine. Appease her in some way. Don't have her continuing to be upset at me like this. It's not a good situation." We're holding the second wide line on the page in an Aleph Amud Beis. So Shalach La, so Ula sent back the following message, trying to appease her. He said, Kol hai navga de birkasahi. The entire barrel that shel beracha was taken from, it's also part of beracha. So meaning, I don't know if the original shel beracha apparently was drunk already, but I'll give you another cup of wine from the same barrel. This was to appease her. So Shalcha Le, Yalta sent back a message to Ula, a parable more like a saying that people say. Mimahadure mili. From peddlers, there are words, which means peddlers that go around trying to sell things, there's a lot of words. The Aleph Amud Beis, the third wide line. Mahadure mili. From the peddlers, there's a lot of words. They go around trying to sell things, and that's how they try to motivate people to buy. Umis martute kilmi. Nun Aleph Amud Beis. Umis martute kilmi. And from old rags comes lice. Now this is an expression, but essentially what she was saying was, you're just telling me something that's insufficient and not true. And therefore, I'm not accepting actually of that alternative option, taking wine from the same barrel. And it's very interesting because that's the end of the story. But as it would appear, is that Ula argued, as I mentioned before, and Ula held that actually you don't send it to the wife. It's not necessary because you give it to her husband and that's just as sufficient. Whereas Yalta, and clearly Yalta and the Yesh Omrim yesterday held that actually that is the necessary thing and you should send it to the wife. Now, just to finish up the parak, the Gemara tells us a series of halachas. Amar Ravasi, ein meisichen al kais shel beracha. Well, you're not supposed to speak from the moment that you pick up the kais shel beracha until you do birkas hamazon. I saw brought down. Some say not only should the mizamin, the one leading birkas hamazon, speak, but also the other people shouldn't speak either. They should go ahead with it, not interrupt. Amar Ravasi, and Ravasi continues, ein mevarchen al kais shel paranus. It's a very interesting halacha. We're not meant to make a bracha. We shouldn't use for the kais shel bracha a kais shel paranus, a cup of destruction. So the Gemara says, "My kais shel paranus." What is that referring to? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak kais sheni. So it refers to an even number of cups of wine. So there's a Gemara that tells us, Rashi speaks this out, that says that a person who drinks an even number of cups of wine gives the ability for mazikim, for shadim, to damage him. That's considered a cup of paranus, and therefore you shouldn't use for birkas hamazon, for this kais shel bracha, birkas hamazon, an even number of cups of wine. Memela, somebody who at the meal had drunk 1 cup of wine should not be the one to lead birkas hamazon because he would be having an even number of cups of wine. So what would be the alternative? Either you don't have somebody lead birkas hamazon with a cup of wine, just lead it without, or somebody else who had 2 cups of wine during the meal could lead it because that's an odd number. That's not considered kais shel paranus. Tani Nami Hachi, the Brisa supports this. Hashoise kiflayim, if somebody drinks in doubles, lo yavarich, he should not lead birkas hamazon, meaning if the double will be the kais shel bracha, that's a problem. Mishum shen emar, because the pasuk tells us in Amos, it says, Hi koin likras elekecha Yisrael. Prepare yourselves to greet your God Yisrael. Meaning that when you come to bench Hashem, it should be done in a prepared way, or in a misukan type of way, a fixed up way. V'hailoi misakin, and this is not considered fixed up, this is detrimental, so that wouldn't be the thing to do. Rabbi Avo, and some say in a Brisa it was taught. This is in regards to birkas hamazon. Now, lechatchila, really, you're not supposed to walk around while you eat. You're supposed to sit like a mensch, eat, and then bench, or whatever, do birkas hamazon after. But Rabbi Avo, and some say in a Brisa taught, if somebody was eating while he was walking, mevarich me'umad, so he shouldn't bench while he's walking, but at least he should stand still. And when he eats while he's standing still, he should bench birkas hamazon when he's sitting. When he was eating leaning in the classic way, so then he should sit down and do birkas hamazon. He should stay seated in the birkas hamazon. I get sit up really from the reclining position. However, the Gemara says we don't paskin like any of this, which is in any scenario, however you ate. Means again, ideally you shouldn't be walking around while you're eating anyways. But if that happened to happen, you should sit down and do birkas hamazon. That is the appropriate behavior. We finished the 7th parak, and we'll continue on now with the 8th. Now we're going to see in this first Mishnah. Thank you. You could join us. We're going to see in this 8th parak. We're going to have 8 machloksim between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in the halachas of seuda. 8 different machloksim. So let's get started. Zok Heilige Mishnah. Elu dvarim sheben Beis Shammai Beis Hillel beseuda. These are the debates between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel regarding seuda. First one. Beis Shammai omer mevarich ala yayin. It's a kiddush Friday night, or the night you go into Yontif also. You're making 2 brachas. You're making Mekadesh HaShabbos, you're sanctifying Shabbos, and you're making another bracha, which is Al Gefen. I mean, you're making on the wine. So what's the order? So the first machlekes is, Beis Shammai omer mevarich ala yayin. First you make a bracha on the day, you make Mekadesh the day with that bracha. whether it's Shabbos or Yontif. V'achar kach mevarech al yayin. And then afterwards you make a hagefen on the wine. And the opposite. First you say Bore Priagofen, and then you make the bracha on the day, which is Lamaisa. That's our minhag. That's what we do. Bore Priagofen, and then you make the kiddush on sanctifying the day. That's machlokes 1. We'll explain the Gemara what this is based on. Each of these debates. Machlokes number 2. Now Rashi learns. We'll go with Rashi. Rashi explains when it comes to meals. We actually spoke about this before. They used to have a cup of wine, which was the pre-seuda wine. It's not kiddush necessarily, just the pre-seuda wine. So Beis Shammai's opinion is, if you're going to have a meal, first you should do netilas yadayim, like for the seuda, for bread. Then mozgenes hakos literally means mix the wine, but it means mix and drink the wine after netilas yadayim. Bisol says no. First you mix the wine, you drink your cup of wine, and then afterwards you wash your hands in netilas yadayim for the seuda. We'll see in the Gemara why this is exactly. There are others that learn this is actually talking about kiddush, but Rashi learns talking about Pasha, the pre-seuda wine that they used to drink. Machlokes number 3. Beis Shammai says that when they would wash Mayim Rishonim, the first waters, when they would wash their hands before a seuda for bread, so you dry your hands with a towel, umanicha ala shulchan, and you can place that towel on the table. Rashi says, and they would use that towel in the continuum of the meal if their hands got sticky. But you put the towel on the table. Now Beisil says no, you put it on the stool or the pillow next to the table, but not on the table. We'll see also in the Gemara what's the pshat in this debate. Machlokes number 4. Beis Shammai oimrim mechabdin es habayis. Now at the end of the meal, so they would sweep up the crumbs of the meal. So Beis Shammai says, first you sweep up the house, means you sweep up the crumbs from the meal. V'achar kach noitlin liyadayim, and then afterwards you do mayim achronim before benching. First you do mayim achronim at the end of the meal, and then you sweep up the crumbs from the meal.
Meaning after Berachos Amazon?
I think it means before l'chara. That's the implication at least. Although we learned earlier that samach netila bracha, so maybe you're right, Taka. I don't know. That's a good question. Meaning we learned before that you're supposed to bench right after mayim achronim. So according to Beis Hillel, perhaps you're right, meaning you should do the sweeping up after, but I don't want to say, but because the implication of our Mishnah is not. But here, let me check into that. Now, machlokes number 5. Okay, this is a unique scenario. Rashi explains as follows. You have a person, it's Matzei Shabbos, okay? He finishes seuda shlishis, he finishes shalosh shudas. So now he has 1 cup of wine, and it needs to double for the Birkas Hamazon that he's going to do, as well as for Havdalah. Okay, so he's going to do an extended prayer service here, which is Birkas Hamazon and Havdalah mixed together. And he has 1 cup of wine. What's the appropriate order of the brachos? You're going to combine Birkas Hamazon and Havdalah. What's the appropriate way? So Beis Shammai oimrim ner. First you say the bracha on ner. Right, Borei Ma'orei Ha'esh. We'll see momentarily what the nusach is actually. Umazain. Then you use that cup of wine for Birkas Hamazon. Bisamim, you make the bracha on the incense, Matzei Shabbos, V'avdalah, and then you make the bracha Mavda Ben Kodesh L'cho. Fine. Beisil say 1 and 4 is the same. Ner, but they say as follows. Ner, first you make a bracha on the candle. Bisamim, then you make a bracha on the incense. Mazain, then you make the bracha on the meal. So they swap 2 and 3. V'avdalah, and the 4th one, they agree to Beis Shammai, it should be Havdalah. Okay, just the stamazai, the ner that's used Matzei Shabbos is, Svarim bring down, because Adam, or Hashem allowed Adam, or assisted Adam inventing fire Matzei Shabbos. He struck 2 stones together and created fire. And Besamim is because the Neshama Yesera, it's leaving us the extra soul of Shabbos, so it's to revive us. It's like smelling salts after Shabbos is over. That's the word in Besamim. Let's move on to the 6th machlokes. Beis Shammai oimrim, what is the language you make over the fire Matzei Shabbos? So Beis Shammai says you say Shebara me'or ha'esh, that Hashem created the light of the fire. Now me'or is singular. That's Beis Shammai's opinion. Beis oimrim borei me'orei ha'esh, and you say me'orei, the lights of the fire. That is the language of Esh. Okay, now this is not a machlokes, but the Mishnah throws in another halacha regarding ner and besamim. Ein mevarchin, you can't use for besamim. You don't make a bracha for besamim or for ner. Lo al ner al haner Velo ala besamim shel akum, not of the candles that was on a candle of fire that was on, or besamim, or incense of goyim. We'll see in the Gemara why that is. Velo ala ner, velo ala besamim shel mesim, nor for a fire or incense of dead that was dedicated for the use of dead bodies. Velo ala ner, velo ala besamim shel avodah zara, nor a candle or besamim that was used for avodah zara. Very interesting. And you're not allowed to make a bracha over the fire until you benefit from that fire. So we'll see in the Gemara exactly what that means. We know on Matzah Shabbos we put our fingers close to it. There's supposed to be some benefit elicited. We'll see in the Gemara exactly how that works. Now back to the arguments. So this is the seventh debate. Misha achal v'shachach velo berach. You have a fellow, he ate a meal, he forgot and he walked away and he hadn't yet done birkas hamazon. So you have a machlekes as to where he's allowed to bench. Beis Shammai Omrim yasser l'mkayim. Beis Shammai says he has to return to his original place v'yivarech and do birkas hamazon there. He is allowed to do birkas hamazon wherever he is. It's a leniency. V'ad masai mevarech, continues the Mishnah. How long does he have? How long is he still allowed to do birkas hamazon? Until the food inside of him digests. The Gemara will tell us what this is exactly. 72 minutes perhaps, but the point is, if he's still full from his meal, he hasn't felt that digestion yet, he's still allowed to say birkas hamazon after his meal. Now the final machlokes, number 8, the Mishnah says, Balahen yayin achar hamazon. Happened as follows. A cup of wine came after the meal. So it's after the meal, before birkas hamazon. A cup of wine is brought to the table. Im ein sham ela oisei kais. If that's the only cup of wine, so meaning he has one cup of wine, he could either drink it now for the post-meal wine, or he could save it and use it for benching for birkas hamazon. So Beis Shammai Omer mevarich ala yayin, that he's allowed to make a beracha of ala gefen and drink it now, v'achar kach mevarich ala hamazon, and then do birkas hamazon without a kais shel yayin. So Omer mevarich ala hamazon, no, we should use that wine for birkas hamazon, v'achar kach mevarich ala yayin, and then do bar pri gefen on that, and we'll see in the Gemara what the machlokes is as well. Final halacha of the Mishnah. You're allowed to answer amen after a Yisrael makes a bracha. Rashi explains, even if you didn't hear the beginning of the bracha, since he's certainly making a bracha to Hashem, you answer amen after that. That's the appropriate thing to do, even if you only heard the end of it. But ve'ein oinin amen achar kusi. You cannot answer amen after a kusi who made a bracha and you didn't hear the beginning. Now, why was that? So the kusim is very interesting. These kusim, I was just learning about the boys in the Mechin actually. The kusim was a group of people that Melech Ashur had put into the northern area of Eretz Yisrael after exiling the 10 tribes. Right? Sancheirav, when he would exile the people from place to place, he would put others in their location. The kusim were brought there, was one of the nations that were brought there. They started to get killed by lions. And what they did was they went through a giur because they thought the God of the Jews was upset at them. But that created a machlekes in Shas. Is that gerei arayos, literally means converts of lions, but they're not really gerim, or are they gerei emes, they're real gerim? It's created a machlekes in Shas. Now, those kusim in the northern region, they had an avodah zara, a dove that they had built on Har Grizim, and they worshipped to it. The problem is if you hear him make a bracha, you don't know, if you didn't hear the beginning, maybe he's blessing to his avodah zara. So you can't respond amen unless you hear the entire thing, as the Mishnah finishes off. So you can only answer amen if you heard the entirety of it. But otherwise, maybe he said Baruch Atah and he inserted something else instead of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore it's not fair to respond. Let's move on to the third and final section now. This is the first machlokes we had in the Mishnah. So we had a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel on Friday night. Let's take Friday night. So you have two brachas to make. You have the bracha of Mekadesh, of sanctifying Shabbos, Kiddush HaYayim, and you also have the bracha of Alagafen, of yayin. So which one do you say first? Beis Shammai said first you make a bracha on the yayin and then Hagafen. Beis Hillel said the opposite. So Tana Rabbanan, the Brisa, Zok the Gemara, the Brisa elaborates on this machlokes. Let's see. Tana Rabbanan, Dvarim shebein Beis Shammai leBeis Hillel b'seuda. Of the machlokesim, the arguments between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel and seuda is this first one, which is Beis Shammai omer mevarich ala yayin v'achar kach mevarich ala yayin. Beis Shammai say you first make a bracha on the day, on Shabbos or Yontif, whatever it is, and then you say Hagefen. And he gives two reasons why. Number one, Shahayim goyrim leyayin sheyavoy. Firstly is because the day causes the wine to come. Why are you making a bracha of bar priagafen? Because it's Shabbos or it's Yontif. So memela, it's logical then that should also take precedence in sanctification of Shabbos and then only say Hagefen after the fact. And number two, the Kfar Kiddush Hayoim, and we know already the day of Shabbos was already sanctified. Means the onset of Shabbos was in Mekabel Shabbos, which is before Kiddush with the Kais shel yayin, or by Tzeisak Achavim if you didn't accept it on yourself. But either way, the onset of Shabbos has already occurred. Va'adayin yayin loiba, even though there wasn't any wine. So as the way Rashi explains this argument to Beis Shammai is, just as in the onset the day starts before the kiddush of wine altogether, it makes sense logically you should be mekadesh Shabbos, and then you should make borei pri hagafen. It's the same thing with the brachos.
Not much for early Shabbos.
What's that?
Not much for early Shabbos.
Well, early Shabbos is the same var. You're still, Shabbos comes before yayin.
No, I'm saying you do it before it says.
No, that you're actually saying in the last case scenario.
Yeah.
Early Shabbos is Givaldik and whatever, but different story. That's the two arguments of Beis Shammai. Now, what's Beis Hillel? Beis Hillel says you say alagofen first. What's pshat? So Beis Hillel says two arguments too. First, you make hagafen and then you make a bracha on the day. Why? Number one, shayayin goyrim lekedusha sheteomer. It's a very interesting svara because the wine causes you to make kiddush. If you didn't have wine, you wouldn't make kiddush. Now we do know that the halacha is you could also make kiddush on pas. But Zakt Rashi, if you only had bread, what would you make first? On the pas, you'd make hamoitzi. It's the same thing. If you don't have it, you can't make the bracha. So mamela Zakt Beis Hillel, it makes sense that you make a bracha on the gefen before the yayin. Beautiful. That's one. Davar acher, and he says another explanation. Birkas hayayin tedira. The bracha on the wine of hagafen is more common. Meaning it's more common. Birkas hamazon in general, which you do with a kais. It's very interesting. Generally, it could be done with a kais. That is much more common. Birkas hayayin ena tedira. Whereas sanctifying the day of Shabbos or Yontif, that's not as common. It's once a week, or Yontif is once every so often, but it's not as common as borei pri hagafen ala kais. So tadir v'she'enoi tadir. If you have something that's constant or more common and less common, tadir kaidem. So the more common thing is first. It precedes. Rashi tells us here from Maseches Zvachim, the source for this, by the way, the mekar for tadir v'she'enoi tadir kaidem. He says the mekar is we find when it comes to the korban tamid and the musafin, which means the korban tamid is the offering that was brought every day, as well as the musafin. The psukim imply that the korban tamid was meant to be brought first. And in addition, there's extra words there in the psukim. Rashi tells us, and those extra psukim teach us that not only there does the tadir precede the she'enoi tadir, but in general, the more regular thing comes before the thing that is less regular. That's what Rashi adds in here. And the Brisa finishes off, the halacha kedivrei Beis Hillel. The Brisa says the psak is like Beis Hillel, so we first say borei pri hagafen, and then we do mekadesh Shabbos, we say the bracha of kiddush. So the Gemara says, firstly, let's analyze this Brisa. My davar acher, right? Why did Beis Hillel need to bring a second argument? Like one argument is sufficient. Generally, bringing a second one shows the first one was not. So the Gemara says because v'chi tema hasam tarti v'achachada. It's a very good reason because Beis Shammai has two arguments. So maybe you'll say maybe Beis Shammai is superior in this case, and Beis Hillel is only one. So there's also two reasons for Beis Hillel because birkas hayayin tedira, birkas hayayin ena tedira. The bracha of hagafen is more common than the bracha over the day. So tadir v'she'enoi tadir kaidem, and therefore it should be preceded. Because there's actually two arguments against two arguments. Fine. Now the Brisa Paskin, the Gemara wonders, but the Brisa Paskin, v'halacha kedivrei Beis Hillel. The halacha follows Beis Hillel. Now we know that the halacha is, it's always like Beis Hillel, besides for notable exceptions. And why is the halacha always like Beis Hillel? Because the Gemara in Eruvin tells us that there were arguments Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel to such a degree that it almost became like two Torahs. It was mamish unbelievable thing until a Baskol came out and told us the halacha is like Beis Hillel. So Frek the Gemara, the Brisa here says we follow Beis Hillel. Pshita, it's obvious, the Hanafka Baskol, because a Baskol came out and told us that. Why does the Brisa here need a paskin like Beis Hillel? So Gemara gives two answers. Iba Yisema Kaiden Baskol. Either this Brisa was before the Baskol, so it needs to tell us we paskin like Beis Hillel here. The Iba Yisema, or alternatively, La'achar Baskol. This is really after the Baskol, turning to Nun Beis and Aleph. So why does the Brisa need a paskin like Beis Hillel? Because Rabbi Yoshua this is the sheet of Rabbi Yoshua. Rabbi Yeshua's position is, we don't care about a baskol. It's a Gemara in Bava Metzia, Rashi quotes, in Tanur Shel Achnoi. It's a big argument there. Rabbi Elazar, if I remember correctly, was arguing against the Chachamim, and Rabbi Elazar was so stark on his beliefs that he was able to elicit a baskol to paskin like him. So Rabbi Yeshua said, what's that? Torah Shemayim, if you don't listen to a baskol, and therefore the Brisa says, yeah, even though there's a baskol, it says psak like Beis Hillel, but Rabbi Yeshua says we don't listen to that. Mela the Brisa needs to say, but in this case the halacha is like Beis Hillel. All right, we'll stop here. We're going to continue to challenge the position of Beis Shammai here, that the yayin goes first tomorrow on Beis Mud Aleph, but for now we'll stop here. Everyone have a wonderful day.
Why does the Gemara say, why does Beis Hillel have